Good morning. We're all up and bushy-tailed and settled in. This is exciting. If you've been thinking through this study that we've been going in 2 Kings and, of course, going back to 1 Kings, doesn't it seem like there's a lot of unchecked evil? I know there's been a lot of evil and there's been some minor punishments almost along the way, but shouldn't it be bigger? Shouldn't there be just a total upheaval of this wicked power that's in place? Well, if you've been waiting for that, this stretch is yours. In chapters 9 through 13 of 2 Kings, over the next several class periods of Kings and Kingdoms divided class, we're going to be looking at all these differing swords of retribution. And we'll be beginning in chapter 9. It'll carry on the next time we have our class on this also into chapter 10. But for today, chapter 9 of the sword of a new character, Jehu. So if you're open to 2 Kings 9, that's great. I hate to do this to you right off the bat, but I'm going to ask you to keep your spot there. And to set the groundwork for what we're going to be discussing today, go back with me to 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings 19. Of course, our prophet on the scene at the moment is Elisha. He's been here for some time, but we need to go back and talk a little bit about his predecessor, Elijah. So 1 Kings 19. And the setting for this is when Elijah has run away from Jezebel. You had the showdown in chapter 18 on Carmel and the defeat of the prophets of Baal. And then the threat is made from Jezebel, the queen, on Elijah's life. And he runs away to what lofty location? Well, that's where the showdown's been. Yeah, no, that's okay. It's an important one in the Old Testament. Very, very important. He goes way down south, not to Egypt, but down in that vicinity. So he has been, and neither one of these is going to be found on our map, but I'll toss it up here because I think it helps a little bit. So up here to the northwest, just a little bit of Megiddo, excuse me, is going to be Mount Carmel. And he goes from there all the way down, well off the map, down in this region. Some believe here, some here. But regardless, to Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. It's been an important location before. And so he runs away. He's not been told by God to do this. Usually he waits for God's instructions. But he runs away. And then we have in verse 19 of 1 Kings, verse 15, of 1 Kings 19. The Lord speaking to him, saying, "Go, return." In other words, you have left your prophetic post, and I didn't give you permission to do this. You shouldn't be away in solitude right now. There was a time for that, but I told you needed to do that, and that's why. But right now, you need to go and do your work as a prophet. I have some tasks appointed for you. What are these? Threefold. Three things, he says, I want you to do. Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, where he's gone from up here to Mount Carmel to Mount Sinai. You're looking at probably 150 miles, give or take. I mean, that's a long trip that he's made all the way down here. And he says, I want you to go from down here all the way to up here. He's going to be traveling a good another 100, 150 miles. He says, I have work for you to do. And it's not in your own country, at least not exclusively. You're going to go to Damascus, which is the capital city of Syria. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be the next king over Syria. Anybody king right now? Well, kind of. Has been up until our last class period. In Syria. Not Ben-Hur, but Ben-Hadad. Good. Okay. That's another one for later. So Ben-Hadad, he has been the king, and he says this guy, Hazael, is going to be the next king over Syria. Not immediately. This is many years back right here. But he's going to be chosen ahead of time, just like David was to be the successor of Saul many years prior. Verse 16, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. So he's going to be the next king in the northern kingdom of God's people. And I need you to appoint Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, and he's going to be prophet in your place. Here's the reason for all this. God speaks to Elijah, and the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, it's a sword of retribution, a sword of justice. So the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, who will be the next king over Syria, shall Jehu, the next king of Israel, put to death. And the one who escapes the sword of Jehu, the next king of Israel, shall Elisha, the next prophet of Israel, put to death. Swords of retribution, justice. Yet, he says, I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. And that's in response to Elijah's complaint. Well, I'm here because there's a threat on my life, and I'm the only one left still serving you. No. It may seem like that sometimes, but there are still 7,000 others just like you. In the wicked, unfortunately, almost turned pagan land of God's own people, Israel, who are still following after me. But I want to go back and read that because this was a prophecy many years, perhaps even decades back at this point, but many years ago that was made through Elijah that Hazael would be the next king of Syria to follow Ben-Hadad, that Jehu would be the next king over Israel, and that Elisha would be the next prophet of Israel. Okay, so as we return a little closer to where we are, we're in 2 Kings 9 today. But, of course, our prophet by this point is the predicted Elisha, okay, the next prophet of Israel. And you recall what just took place back in chapter 8 as far as it relates to up to the northeast of God's people, Syria. There's been a transfer of power, at least a loss of power at this point. If you look in about verse 7 of 2 Kings 8, previous chapter, 2 Kings 8, then Elisha, the new prophet on the scene, went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, was sick. And it was told him, saying, the man of God has come here. And the king said to Hazael, take a present in your hand, go meet the man of God and inquire, shall I recover from this disease? So Hazael, oh, that's interesting. We've seen that name before. This is his right-hand man. This is his helper, right? Hazael went to meet the prophet, took a present with him, and he said, your son, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent to me, saying, shall I recover from this disease? And Elisha said to him, go say to him, you shall certainly recover. However, the Lord has shown me that he will really die. That's not a lie, though. He's not going to die from the disease. He's going to start to get better from it. Then his countenance was in a stare until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. And Hazael said, why is my Lord weeping? He said, I know the evil that you're going to do to God's people, the children of Israel. Their strongholds you're about to set on fire. Their young men you will kill with the sword. Ah, sword of retribution, justice. And you'll dash their children and rip open their women with child. He's going to go beyond justice, though. So Hazael said, how could that happen? What is your servant? A dog? I'm nothing. I'm a nobody. I'm powerless. Well, not entirely, but, compared to the king of Syria. And Elisha answered, the Lord has shown me that you will become king over Syria. And he departed from Elisha, came to his master, who said to him, what did Elisha say to you? And he said, he told me you will surely recover. He doesn't finish, though, what it is that Elisha told him, that he would still die. Verse 15, but it happened on the next day that he took a thick cloth, dipped it in water, and spread it over the king's face and the weakness of his body. He can't do anything to fight it off. And he died. He didn't die from his disease, just like the man of God said, but he died from suffocation. And Hazael, just as God predicted many years prior, reigned in his place in Syria. Okay, so I wanted to remind of those couple things now as we start out in our text in 2 Kings 9 in the first verse. There were these three predictions that were made from God through Elijah. Number one, that Hazael was going to be the next king of Syria. Number two, that Jehu, a guy by the name of Jehu, would be the next king of Israel. And thirdly, that Elisha would be the next prophet of Israel. Elisha is already the prophet, and Ben-Hadad of Syria has just recently died. Hazael has taken over in his place. Well, what about the third element of the prophecy in Jehu? So verse 1 of 2 Kings 9. And Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, get yourself ready. Take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. It's going to be a pretty good trip for the fellow. one of the sons of the prophets, one of the understudies, kind of like Elisha was to Elijah. And what we have is a travel to Ramoth Gilead, as you can tell on the northeastern side of your screen, kind of in the top right there. They're going to be traveling, it would appear, probably from Jezreel, which is somewhat of like the second capital of Israel, or the capital, which would be in Samaria. And if they're traveling from Jezreel, they have about a 50-mile journey to the east, or this son of the prophet does. And if he's going from Samaria, you might be looking a little bit more at a 75-mile trip up to the northeast. It's going to be a good traverse, no matter how you look at it. He said, get ready. Take this flask of oil in your hand, and I want you to go to this town of Ramoth Gilead on the east side of the Jordan River. Now, when you arrive at that place, look there for Jehu. I wonder why they're going to be looking around for Jehu. God has been making these predictions for many years, if not a decade, maybe even plus by this point, about these three people, and this is the third leg of this prophecy, so it needs to be fulfilled. Look for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. That identifies even more. And go in and make him rise up from among his associates, and take him to an inner room. Okay, this is interesting. So why do you think that's going to happen? Why does he need to get up from all of his buddies and go aside to a separate room? Yeah, why wouldn't you want others to see and hear the good news, Justin? Okay, and it's going to be seen as treason, really, isn't it? Treachery. If you start talking about, we have a king in place, a king in waiting, and there's already a king who is ruling. So good point, Justin. That makes a lot of sense. You need to separate, and this isn't news for everybody. This is just news right now for this guy. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head, showing the Lord's blessing upon him, and say, thus says the Lord, I have anointed you to be king over Israel. God has chosen this guy. Then open the door and flee, and do not delay. Okay, so you don't want everyone hearing, maybe for the sake of this one, just this guy hearing, what's the big deal about the prophet who's just bringing the good news? Okay. As others would see it, Justin says he shouldn't be there to begin with, number one. And number two, he's just connected himself to part of what appears to be a coup to overthrow the sitting king. Now, this is okay, because this is God doing the choosing. He's already done it, and he's just passing along. This is not a prophet willy-nilly saying, I don't like this guy and I want a new king, okay? It's God saying, I don't like this guy and I want a new king. So you do what I tell you. And he needs to do what God has said. But he says, once you tell him in secret, this is not for the ears of everyone, number one. Number two, you had better get out of Dodge like yesterday. Yeah, they're going to be coming after you also. You're going to be viewed as part of a conspiracy to overthrow the crown if people find out about this. Okay. But people shouldn't find out about this. He's being told in secret. So why would God tell him, get out of there as fast as you can? What do you think that might be insinuating? People are going to be finding out about it very quickly. Well, let's see, and I don't mean this, this disrespectfully, but let's see if God knows what he's talking about why he would need to get out so very quickly. Verse 4, so the young man, 2 Kings 9 for everybody. Verse 4, so the young man, the servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. And perhaps he makes the journey from Jezreel or Samaria, 50, 75 miles, some distance away. And he goes, and when he arrives, there were the captains of the army sitting. These are the bigwigs. And in walks this young prophet. Probably feels like he doesn't belong. But he walks into this place, and here are all the big people in the army just sitting around. And he said, excuse me, sir. I have a message for the commander. And Jehu looks around and he says, which one of us? They're all commanders, sitting there. He's probably not used to talking to these kinds of guys. Which one of us? it's interesting that Jehu asks, he says, for you, sir, for this commander right here, I need to talk to you. Then he arose and went into the house, and he poured, this is, right? So he takes him to the side, goes off into the house, and he pours the oil on his head, showing the Lord's approval, God's choosing. And he says to him, look, this isn't my doing, right? Thus says the Lord God of Israel, Yahweh Elohim of Israel. I have anointed you, you're my choosing, to be king, the next one, over the people of the Lord, over Israel. And God says, here's what I want you to do. This is your first order of business. You shall strike down the house, meaning the whole family of Ahab, your master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. What does he mean, avenge the blood of my prophets? Okay. Everyone that that Ahab's house is killed, and Jezebel, the wife, was a big part of that. She's the linchpin in all of this. Now it's sad that Ahab has dearly departed from among us. But guess who's still around, stirring the pot behind the scenes? The wife survives. Okay, that might not be for very long because the swords of justice are being introduced. So God says, first order of business, Jehu, I want you to strike down the whole family, the house of Ahab, your master. He's already dead, but his family's not. That I may avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets. Jezebel in particular is responsible for killing many of the prophets of God. And the blood of all the servants of the Lord, innocent people, at the hand of Jezebel. What's another person's name? Anyone stand out to you? For sure, we know the name. It was completely innocent. It may or may not have had his land stripped from him. And when Ahab wanted an extra vegetable garden. Oh, Naboth. Remember him? Naboth in his vineyard. Now, in fairness to Ahab, I don't think he would have ever done it if it were just Ahab. But Jezebel is really the one who does it. And almost even, well, really does, behind the king's back, uses his signet ring and, takes care of everything. But the issue with Ahab is afterward, when he finds out about it, he just goes right along with it. So he becomes complicit in the sinful actions and becomes a part of this murder. So there are other people who are innocent, like Naboth. That's a big one as far as name-wise that stands out. God says, now's the time for judgment to come on this family. 8, for the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab all the males in Israel, both bond and free. So what's going to be the result then when this family purging takes place? As far as the major role this family has had in the kingdom. Going to create a vacuum, he says, for power. And it's strange, in the north, you have these families who could be dynasties that never really turn into dynasties. They're at the most a lot of times 2, 3 kings is in the case of this one, and then it's over, and it becomes the next family. And whenever you have this, there's all kinds of wickedness going on, and the strongest and the meanest and the vilest often get into power. It's in these types of dictatorships. It's a real contrast with the South. So the first king of the South, what's his name? After the divided kingdom, of course, I know David's a king, but he's not, part of the divided kingdom. Solomon is next. He's not a part of the divided kingdom. The first king in the South is whom? Is who? Bless you. Rehoboam. You have Jeroboam in the north, Jeroboam the first. There's a second that comes along later. And then Rehoboam in the south. And then, okay. Who is the son of? David. All right. And you'll see that all the way through in Judah is a dynasty in the south. And the reason for this is God set up David and his descendants. This is going to be a permanent type of kingship, kind of. There's going to be an intermission, a little bit of an interlude to this after you get down to Zedekiah. But then eventually there's going to be a king that comes from this lineage who sits on the throne, and he's never going to vacate that throne. That, of course, is our Savior, our Redeemer for our Sunday morning sermon, Jesus the Christ. But the point of which is this. There's this constant turnover in the north because of the evil. And then as Justin stated, then there's this vacuum, this implosion on itself and an attraction for the next evil person to come into power. But God chooses this one. And I wish I could say he's not evil. We're going to have in our memory verse for the next time in chapter 10, he's still evil. He's not everything God desires in a person. He's not a man after God's own heart, that's for sure. But at the same time, he seems to have a little bit of a zeal for the Lord. There are some positives to him, especially compared to the other kings of Israel. Okay, so back in verse 8, for the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab all the males in Israel, both bond and free. And that means that this dynasty that could have been is over, just a few kings into it. Number 9, so I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. That's the first king in the north. And like the house of Baasha, just a few kings later, the son of Ahijah. What happens with their houses? Jeroboam and Baasha. They're eliminated, and justice. All of the sons are killed off, so there are no more rulers, right? And he says the same thing is going to happen to the house of Ahab. Verse 10, listen to this. The dogs shall eat Ahab on the plot of ground at Jezreel. Why at Jezreel? What happened at Jezreel? Okay, so worship of Baal that takes place there. This is a second capital almost. Okay, it's kind of a nice getaway for some have had in the past. They have Martha's Vineyard kind of, for the rulers. And so you have that up at Jezreel. And there's something else that took place here. Beautiful location, great place for a vegetable garden. As fate would have it, that is the very area where Naboth's vineyard was murderously and with thievery taken away from him. This is a prophecy. God says, the dog shall eat Jezebel on the very plot of ground at Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And remember, that's a big deal back then. Really, that's a pretty big deal in our time, too, for most of us. I don't know about you, but I'm one of those that, hey, when it's my time, I don't care if I'm buried at all. I don't care where I'm buried. It makes no difference to me. Disintegrate me if you want. When it's time, God's going to put the pieces back together. It doesn't matter to me, but it's viewed differently in other parts of the world, and even in our country, on the norm, when a person doesn't even get a decent burial, and that's for the highest figure in the nation or one of in the ruling family. And he opened the door and he fled. He's a smart guy. He listens to God. So what he just said is this: God has chosen his king over his people, and it's not the one who's sitting in power. And it's not from the family who's had the last 3 kings. You're not going to be a popular guy whenever the family finds that out. In fact, he says the queen mother, who's been the real problem for decades to this nation, she's going to die. Dogs are going to eat her because her body's not even going to get buried. Smart guy to open the door and run out as soon as those words fall out of his mouth. Well, why? This is said in secret. What's it going to matter? God always knows, from our perspective, the future. To God, the future is ancient past. Verse 11, then Jehu came out to the servants of his master, and one said to him, is all well? Why did this madman, this crazy dude, come to you? And he said to them, oh, you know the man and his babble. You know the way the Lord's prophets are, how they just run their mouths and never make any sense. They sense that, maybe when he's telling them, he looks down. That's a telltale sign. Someone doesn't give you eye contact when you ask them a potentially dangerous question. They're not telling you the truth, is what the trained professionals would say. They know each other well, and they said, a lie. You're not telling us what really happened. Come on, tell us. What did he really say? Tell us now. And So he said, thus and thus he spoke to me, saying, thus says the Lord, I have anointed you king over Israel. This is supposed to be a secret, but God knows that it will not remain a secret. It may be that the man of God needed to pull him over to the side so that he had just enough time before the secret got spread to get out of there so that his life wouldn't be in danger. Verse 13, then each man hastened to take his garment and put it under him on the top of the steps. And they blew trumpets, saying, Jehu is king. This word's going to be spreading very quickly as the announcements are going to be made with the blowing of the trumpets. But if you'll notice, you probably get a pretty good idea of what people think of the house of Ahab by this point. I think they are ready for a break. Decades they've been dealing with this terrible family, and they want someone new to be in charge, at least these military people. And again, you see this a lot in dictatorships, especially where people are evil tyrants. Often the military will be the ones that will overthrow the person who's in power, and you'll see a very important military general then who will assume the throne. So that's exactly what's taking place right here. We also know about military people. When they assume the throne, they're not afraid of fighting. When you see someone who's afraid of fighting, who's a leader of a country, they probably haven't been part of a military before. Now, that's just an observation. I'm not saying a person ought to be or not. That's just the reality of the way it works. So you probably have people who have been a little more passive in these succeeding generations of Ahab. They probably haven't been serving in the armed forces. Now you have a military general who's being put in charge of the country. Do you think he's going to be afraid to fight and to shed a little blood? Verse 14, so Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram, who remember is also known as Jehoram. Now Joram had been defending Ramoth-Gilead, he and all Israel, against Hazael, king of Syria. So here's what we have as far as what's taken place. The son of the prophet has been dispatched, probably either from Samaria or Jezreel, to go over to Ramoth-Gilead to be anointed on the east side of the Jordan River. And just when you'd be thinking, why in the world would you go over there and not just do this in the capital city or some other place? Well, now we find out that the king has been over in this place, defending this town on the east side of the Jordan River, which makes a lot of sense, from Hazael, the new king over Syria, who's brought his sword of justice down into this place. And remember, the Syrians are found just up from here. It's going to be a lot harder for them to get over here and attack this area, much easier for them to go down and to attack this spot. So he and all Israel had been defending Ramoth-Gilead against Hazael, king of Syria. But King Jehoram, or Joram, had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which the Syrians had afflicted on him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And Jehu said, if you are so minded, let no one leave or escape from the city to go and tell it in Jezreel. All right, so you have this conspiracy that's taking place, and basically what Jehu tells them is this. There's a line that's been drawn in the sand, and you make your choice right now. Are you on my side, or are you on the sitting king's side? If you're on my side, your lips are sealed. You don't go tell this throughout the town. We leave this as a surprise for the king to find out. Verse 16, so Jehu rode in a chariot, like a king would do, and went to Jezreel, for Joram, or Jehoram, was laid up there. And in addition to this, Ahaziah, king of Judah. And remember, this gets a little confusing, because there's there is a Joram or a Jehoram right now. There's been one in the south, Ahaziah. Okay, there's been one of those in the north, and now there's an Ahaziah in the south. Remember, these families have intermarried, and they're using a lot of the same names, probably because of the mutual respect, unfortunately, that they have for one another. So in this alliance, which should not be, God has warned and warned the family of Jehoshaphat, you shouldn't be having anything to do with the household of Ahab because they're evil. And they enter into all these national treaties with them. They intermarry with them. They're doing Thanksgiving and Christmas and 4th of July together. They're just one and the same. And anytime one needs help, the evil in the north, the evil king will ask, hey, I'm going to do this. You want to come help me? Hey, my people are as your people. Our families are one. And God has warned them time and again. And after, what do we have now? The third time of this, like a different person, God's finally going to give the judgment through the sword of justice because he's fed up with it. So Jehu, the commander of Israel, the armies, rode in a chariot, went to Jezreel, so he travels at about 50 miles, basically due west, to get to kind of the second capital in Israel, Jezreel. For Joram, who is currently the king of Israel, was laid up there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to see Joram, to check on him. Now this king is from Jerusalem, and you can probably tell from the map, he's traveled a very good distance, 7,500 miles north, to get to and to check on his family member, see how he's doing recovering from the battle wounds that he's recently received. Verse 17, now a watchman stood on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came. And he said, it's in the distance here, but I see a company of men. And Joram said, get a horseman and send him to meet him and let him say, is it peace? So you can see in the distance there's someone riding, and there's a group, maybe some soldiers. That's enough for alarm. Want to figure out what exactly is going on. Smart king. So the horseman went to meet him and said, thus says the king, is it peace, or are you coming peacefully? And Jehu answered in this way, what have you to do with peace? Turn around and follow me. Is it really peace that the most important thing is that's on your mind? Or do you want to be a part of something greater? So the line has been drawn in the sand. You make your choice right now. Listen to this. So the watchman reported, saying, the messenger went to him, but he's not riding back. What does that tell you? He has switched sides, hasn't he? Yes, or it could, maybe he's dead, but being able to see, that might, probably wouldn't be the case. He's not coming back. So verse 19, this is like the ark and sending out the birds. So he sent a second horseman who came to them and said, thus says the king, is it peace? And Jehu answered, in a way you probably heard before, what have you to do with peace? Well, why is peace on your mind? Turn around and follow me. Be a part of this overthrow. So the watchman reported, saying, he went up to them and is not coming back. What does this tell you about the family of Ahab and the respect that they command in the kingdom? His right-hand men who have been standing there with him are defecting one by one to this other side. And again, especially in an evil dictatorship, you'll often see this. People, they gravitate toward, they get behind the person who's really been pulling the reins all these years. And so they're getting behind, one by one, the military general. So the watchman reported, saying, he went up to them in verse 20 and is not coming back, just like the first one. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Have you ever watched someone approaching in a vehicle some way away? You can't make out all the details of the vehicle, but you say, I've only seen driving like that with one person. And I'm not going to name any names, okay? I'm sure it would never be the females who would be driving that way, just so everybody knows it. But now, someone in your family or some friend, and I know that, kind of like the distinctive walk of somebody from a distance away. And that's the case with this guy. I mean, he drives like he's the boss, okay? He is. He's in charge of the military. He says, I've seen that driving. I've only seen it in one place, even though I can't make out all the details just yet. If I've ever seen Jehu driving, that's Jehu's chariot. He's the only one who drives that way. Then Joram said, this is the king of Israel, make ready. Okay, so now he's a little bit on alert, like something's not quite right here. Then Joram, king of Israel, and as fate would have it, Ahaziah, king of Judah, both in one place. 2 kings, 2 birds, maybe 1 stone. We'll see. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, went out, each in his chariot. So wise about this, split up just a little bit. And they went out to meet Jehu and met him on, at this point I'm going to say, as providence would have it, on the very property of Naboth, the Jezreelite. How fitting. Ahab's family. Now it happened when Joram saw Jehu that he said, same message he's been sending out, "Is it peace, Jehu?" This has been his trusted right-hand man for a number of years. And he says, "Hey, is everything okay? I can still trust you, brother, right?" So he answered, "What peace? As long as the harlotries of your mother, Jezebel, and her witchcraft are so many." That's the point at which he knows. It's one thing you talk about a king, a sitting king. But you start talking about a sitting king's mama. And it's all out war. He's talking about his mom now. So at this point, Joram realizes what's going on. 23. Then Joram turned around and fled and said to Ahaziah, "Treachery, Ahaziah!" Meaning there's a conspiracy among us. Run for your life. Now Jehu, who's about to become the next king of Israel, he's a military guy. He can shoot. He's been trained. Now Jehu drew his bow with full strength and shot Jehoram between his arms. That's in the back. And the arrow came out at his heart. I'm going to guess that he's had a few of these kill shots in his life. And now he puts the kill shot in on his boss. Came out at his heart, and immediately he's dead. He just sank down in his chariot. Then Jehu said to Bidkar, his captain, "Pick him up, just throw him out, right here where we are, into the tract of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite." For remember, when you and I were riding together behind Ahab his father, this is years back, that the Lord laid this burden upon him. He said, "Surely I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, says the Lord, and I will repay you in this plot, says the Lord. Now therefore, take and throw him on the plot of ground according to the word of the Lord." Now, if Ahab's family would have been God-fearing people, and in fairness, maybe they don't know all the details, but it might have been a good idea to be staying away from the field of Naboth, because at some point, that's where we're going to meet our demise in this place. And maybe they don't know all the details, but it could be too that they do, and it's just the pride of their hearts. They think they're too powerful, they're too smart, and this is never going to happen. Everybody trusts them. Yeah, right. But regardless, it's what happens, just in line with exactly what the Lord stated. Verse 27. But when Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw this, he fled. He survives. Remember, king of Judah. He fled by the road to Beth-Hagan. And that's going to be another name for Beth-Gon that you'll see up here on the map. Some of these are known by different designations. That's just a few miles down to the southwest of Jezreel. So he fled by the road to Beth-Hagan. So Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also in the chariot." And they shot him at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam, or Ebleam, which is going to be, again, just a few more miles down to the south. Hopefully you can make out on the map. Then he fled to Megiddo, which is a really interesting route. The king of Judah starts fleeing from Jezreel down south. Now, why would that make some sense? All right, yeah, I'd want to get away from these people, and especially you get across the border of your country, probably some reinforcements are going to come help out or be watching there. Yeah, so he's headed way back down, probably to Jerusalem, but once he gets shot, then he turns around. and he goes up in the direction of Mount Carmel and at Megiddo. Then he fled to Megiddo and died there. And his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem, which is probably where he was headed in the first place, and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king over Judah. And so that gives us an idea that he reigns for 11 years, the king in the south, before he dies. I ask you to turn over to the parallel of this of 2 Chronicles 22. And if you're wondering, well, the swords of retribution, the justice is being brought on the house of Ahab, why does the king of Judah have to suffer along with them? Because the people in Judah tend to be doing a better job than those in Israel. 2 Chronicles 22 gives us a little more information, verses 7 through 9. But it was ordained by God that the downfall of the king in the south, Ahaziah, should come about through his going to visit Joram. God does not approve of this association. And for 3 kings now, he's tried to warn this family. The clan of Jehoshaphat, stay away from these people, have nothing to do with them. And they enter into alliance after alliance. If that's not enough, marriage alliance. Their families become one. They call each other after one another's names. They celebrate all the holidays together. They fight the same wars. And finally, God's had enough with the evil associations when he's told them multiple times to knock it off. For when he came there, he went out with Jehoram to meet Jehu, the son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had anointed to destroy the house of Ahab. And when Jehu was executing judgment on the house of Ahab, he met the princes of Judah and the sons of Ahaziah's brothers, who attended Ahaziah, and he killed them. He searched for Ahaziah, and he was captured while hiding in Samaria. And he was brought to Jehu and put to death. They buried him, for they said, he is the grandson of Jehoshaphat who sought the Lord with all his heart. And the house of Ahaz had no one able to rule the kingdom. And so this is a judgment that's been brought on, again, because of these evil associations. Now, he does get a respect that the others do not. What's that respect? He gets buried at least, okay, because he was the son of a good guy. Okay, that's something that you can say about him. We're going back to, and let's finish up our text now, verse 30 of 2 Kings 9. So when Jehu had come to Jezreel, and if this is in sequence, as many believe it is, you're looking probably at about 3 hours after King Jehoram of Israel has died. Came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she put paint on her eyes and adorned her head and looked through a window. What do you think she's doing here? Puts paint on her eyes and adorns her head. Okay, one of the two, right? And I think, Justin, it may be the first. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. He said either she's making herself look pretty or she's preparing herself for war. Okay, and war can be a pretty thing, but usually it's not. So probably not the two of them together. I think it's probably the first one. I think she's used to manipulating people through her looks. Could be. Yeah, absolutely. I'm Queen Mother. Yeah, right. Could be a combination of some of these. All right, so I'm leaning towards she dolls herself up, Justin. May not be, but I'm leaning toward that. She puts her makeup on. She fixes her hair. Oh, she's always gotten her way. And she's so important. How could she not anyway? She calls the shots. And she looks through a window. Maybe it's like a painting, how beautiful and elegant she is up there. Well, don't forget she's dealing with a military guy that doesn't care too much about prettiness during war. Okay. Then as Jehu entered at the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" We don't have time to talk a lot about it. This goes back to 1 Kings 16. He's one of the kings of Israel who, by conspiracy, kills the man in charge and takes over. So that's what she says. Oh, one who kills the man in charge and takes over, just like Zimri. And he looked up at the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" So 2 or 3 eunuchs looked at him, kind of gave him the, one of those kinds of things. Then he said, "Throw her down." Ouch, literally. So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses. And then he said, "Trample her underfoot." I mean, this is no pun intended, but beating a dead horse right here, okay? She's already dead. Now trample her body really, really nicely. This guy, you don't mess around with Jehu. And when he had gone in, he ate and drank. Then he said, go now, see to this accursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter, wanting to show her still that courtesy of respect. Who'd like to say 35, our memory verse? Quickly. Okay. Bobby? Very good. Nicely done, Bobby. Yeah. Ooh. So they go to pay her their respect and bury her, but there's nothing left other than her skull, her feet, the palms of her hands, her torso, all the soft tissue parts. It's gone. Why is that? Verse 36. Therefore they came back and told them, they said, it's because it's the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah. Remember the prophecies? The Tishbite, saying, on the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as refuse on the surface of the field in the plot at Jezreel, so that they shall not say, here lies Jezebel. Now, verse 34, after he's done all of this, she's dead, tramples her underfoot, he's hungry. He goes in and he has dinner. I mean, can you imagine after all this bloodshed and gore and ordering these executions and of the powers that be, like, man, I'm famished. Anybody else hungry? He goes in and eats, and then he comes back out and says, well, I guess we ought to bury her. Dogs have already gotten to her because of what the word of the Lord said. And it makes me think of what Jesus spoke to Peter when Peter draws out his sword. Lord, shall we strike? I'm ready. What warning does Jesus give Peter? You can. Don't. But you can. Why? Why should he not? What happens to those who live by the sword? Give it enough time, and you'll also die by the sword. And here's what you see. I know it's not literally by the sword, but these people who have made lives off of stealing and murdering, and then in the end, they get killed in gruesome ways themselves. The one who lives by the sword dies by the sword. That's chapter 9 of 2 Kings. Next time we're together, it'll be a few weeks. We have some missionary presentations. Excited about that coming up. And also then our special on America's most pressing need. But the next time we get together for this class will be in chapter 10. Please read that. Stay in tune for the bulletin when that would need to be. And let's do for our memory work verse 31 of 2 Kings 10. 2 Kings 10:31. If you're thinking, man, I thought all the kings of Israel were these evil dudes, and Jehu, he's got some backbone to him. He's a good guy. He's better. But he's not quite a servant after the Lord's own heart. And our memory verse for next time will tell us why that's the case. Okay, anything else from chapter 9, though? 10:31, yes, sir. Thanks for double checking. Okay, that's all. We're dismissed. Thanks.